Hey guys, Wyatt Claypool here. We are back on the whiteboard today, breaking down another Canadian national poll, this one from Abacus Data, that I believe tells a story about where Canadian politics are going to go over the next few months. I want to go over what I believe that story is in just a moment, but I want to remind you, if you like these breakdown videos, make sure to leave a like on the video, subscribe if you are not yet a subscriber, and leave a comment about what you think about the current state of Canadian politics. I like to scroll through and see what people are saying. And selfishly enough, it also benefits me if you comment since it helps us on the algorithm, but I do genuinely like to scroll through a few times. The story I think is currently going on in Canadian politics is that while Prime Minister Mark Carney and the Liberal government are still in a honeymoon period where people are willing to give them the benefit of the doubt and say they approve of Carney and his government because, well, they're only a few months in, let's give them a shot. Carney is actually having his approval rating slip a little bit. His government's approval rating is starting to stagnate. They are not making gains with Canadians despite acting like they are getting a lot of stuff done. They are just not actually getting much done. And to a lot of Canadians who were willing to give them the benefit of the doubt, it's already feeling like just another Liberal government. And they've always kind of been on thin ice that way. If they don't start delivering big policy wins, they will have a lot of people just go back to thinking about them the way they thought about Justin Trudeau's Liberal government. Maybe not in late 2024, but maybe in mid 2022 or even early 2023. Their polling was not great, but it wasn't terrible either. And that's not exactly a great position for Mark Carney to be in when he's supposed to be so much different and he's supposed to revive the Liberals' electoral chances. Now, he did in the 2025 federal election, but there was a lot of factors going in favor of the Liberals in that election that don't really apply to any future races that they're in. They had the trade crisis with Donald Trump that they've already fumbled. They had Justin Trudeau being swapped out with someone who's boring and could say that he is totally different, and they were running on a bold platform to deviate policy, which they really haven't. And now the other side of the story is that while federal Conservative Party leader Pierre Poilievre is not in Parliament, I believe the date is August 18th, he will be elected as the new MP for the riding of Battle River Crowfoot. Now, we will see what percentage of the vote he gets in that by election. I don't really see it as a big deal if he doesn't come in at the exact number that Damien Kirk got. Damien Kirk got 86%, but by-election turnouts are always a little bit odd. So even if he gets like 68% or 72, perfectly fine. He just needs a seat, and it's not really going to have any effect. If he comes in like below 65%, 64, maybe that's going to have implications over his leadership review. Even then, that's a bit of a dicey kind of prediction to make that if he comes in under a certain amount, he's going to be dead as the party's leader. I think a lot of people know that this is just basically a job to get him into Parliament, and that's it. Some people might not like that he's running there. It doesn't really matter. He's not even going to run there after this by-election. Damien Kirk's going to be coming back. But once Poilievre is back, I think what you're going to see with the Liberals is that Poilievre's approval rating is going to rise as people are seeing new content from him in Parliament, as he's able to actually credibly speak as the leader. And what is already not a great lead for the Liberals could get worse. Now, this Abacus data poll, going to the whiteboard, is only showing the Liberals leading by 3 points. I do genuinely believe that the Liberals are probably more so leading by anywhere from 5 to 6 points. They are in their honeymoon. I find that Abacus just tends to be a little bit more bearish with incumbents. Nanos polling is complete nonsense right now. They're showing the Liberals have like a 14-point lead, and the Conservatives crashed all the way down to just 32%, and the Liberals are like 45 or 47. That's just not how public approval ratings work. Nanos wasn't inaccurate in the last election, but if you assumed that their polling numbers were like gospel truth, it would have indicated the Liberals would win like 190 seats or so, and they didn't get the majority that they wanted. Nanos, while they basically showed a tie before election day, that was closer than what Nanos was showing, which was the Conservatives only getting 39% of the vote, when in fact they got 41.5%, and the Liberals didn't do, I think they basically got what Nanos said, but again, the difference between the Conservatives being a couple points down, a couple points up, really does matter when it was only a two-horse race. NDP still not doing so hot, but let's just talk about what this poll is currently telling us. The Liberals, 43%, effectively maintaining what they had. Conservatives, 40%, a little bit of a drop back. And if an election was to be held today, while yes, I believe that this would result in a Liberal majority, it's not exactly a very safe number to be at for them. And when you actually look at the regional numbers, which I'll put on the board later, a lot of what's hurting the Conservatives is just a little bit of a fallback in Ontario and a little bit of a fallback in British Columbia. But these are not exactly numbers that I believe are going to stay steady. So they're effectively in a tie because this poll comes with about a 2.5 point plus or minus margin of error. But now what I want to do is jump into the approval ratings of both Carney, the government, and Pierre Poilievre, because this number is technically stagnant from Abacus's previous number. But the big thing we're seeing a shift in is people's willingness to think that Mark Carney's doing a good job or that the Liberal government has solutions to the current trade crisis that we're in and what is now turning into a job crisis with 41,000 jobs being lost in the month of July alone. So here we have the Liberal government's approval between the month of May and now August. And I will point out that the August poll was done on August 4th, which doesn't actually leave that much time for Canadians to adjust to the new reality that Mark Carney's Liberal government did not actually get a trade deal signed with the Trump administration in the United States, which was a keystone platform of both Carney's leadership race as well as the general election, and that will hurt him. I know many Canadians will be predisposed to just saying, if we didn't get a deal done, it's probably Trump and the Americans' fault. But people who start having, to pay higher prices, not just because of the tariffs, but because of the cost of becoming USMCA compliant in order to go duty free to not pay the tariffs, people are going to start saying that, maybe he lied to us saying that he knew how to deal with people like Donald Trump. But back in May, the approval rating of the government was 53 and the disapproval rating was 23. That's a pretty good rating. Anyone in Canadian politics would kill to be above 50% on their approval. And in August, he's still at 50, but we've also had the disapproval jump up by 27%. And then you will also see in the underlying poll that undecideds since around June or July have also increased as well. So a lot of undecideds before moved from, beforehand, a lot of people moved from undecided to disapproval, and a lot of people have moved from approval to undecided. This being a 6 point swing since May. So, of course, you've gone down by 3, and then you, in terms of the approval, and you've gone up by 3 in terms of the disapproval. And when you follow one pollster month after month that has a stable methodology for how they do polling, this does matter. And again, I find Abacus to be a very bearish kind of a pollster. They don't have samples that go all over the place. The problem with a pollster like Nanos is that they don't often balance for who you voted for last election. So what will happen? I guess they sometimes do that, but I've just not detected in their data. You'll have a lot of people who voted Liberal last time saying they're going to vote Liberal next time, and it seems like there's a big public approval shift or a big national polling shift. It's not. You're just happening to poll a lot of partisan Liberals who voted Liberal last time. Real national polling shifts should show that you poll the exact ratio of people who voted Conservative, Liberal, NDP, Bloc, Green from last time, and you see where some of those voters are now moving their votes to, including people who didn't vote. How would they vote if they did turn up this next time? And so Abacus, with their very stable polling methodology, has seen the approval rating since May fall a bit. People seeing that, Bill C5 doesn't really do anything. They're not really doing that good when it comes to trade negotiations. Mark Carney is starting to slip back into a lot of the, well, why should I type rhetoric that the Liberals have around pipelines. We approve of pipelines, but, well, why should I if First Nations don't want it? Or why should we actually approve it if we can't get the provinces on board? Carney's playing games pretending like he's in favor of pipelines while making every excuse and outsourcing, saying no to new pipeline projects to whoever he can find around him. Now, again, this doesn't mean if an election was held today, they're in trouble. These are fine approval ratings. But considering that he's in his honeymoon period and he's already lost 3 approval points and his disapproval's gone up 3, it's kind of showing where we might be in 3 months when we have Poilievre back in Parliament and we have the Conservatives every day in Parliament being able to call out Liberal failures, including the NDP as well, because the Liberals are walking this very strange tightrope where at the same time they are spending us into probably at the end of the year what is going to be a $100 billion deficit. They're also proposing cutting certain civil servants, which is ticking off unions and also bolstering the popularity of the NDP. The NDP should not be popular at all. So Carney's giving them a free win. At the same time, he's not even being fiscally responsible. So he's doing the worst of both worlds type things. Really, what he's going to do is end up firing a bunch of public sector union workers in favor of new consultants, which is kind of a bit of a slap in the face to everybody. Taxpayers were wanting actual fiscal efficiency, as well as those union employees who may have voted Liberal this last election and will shift back NDP. But now I want to move over to Carney's approval, then we will jump to Pierre's. It's a similar story, but I think it's worth looking at. Now we're on to Prime Minister Mark Carney's approval, and immediately what I find kind of odd between his May and August numbers is you will notice that Mark Carney is actually less popular than the Liberal government. It tends to actually work the other way around, and I think it's because Carney just fundamentally lacks a certain level of charisma that typically a charismatic leader is always more popular than the government because the government's the cold institution that the politician leads. But Mark Carney in May, when the government approval rating was 53%, he was at a 51. And right now, the government's approval in August is 50, but he's only a 48. His disapproval in May, back when the government's disapproval was 23, was 27, which is the current government disapproval rating, but that one has gone up to 29. So we are again seeing a shift in a similar direction, with Carney's approval rating having fallen by 3 points again, and the disapproval rating having gone up by 2. So we are seeing a swing by 5. But again, what's happening, it's not that people go from approval to disapproval. People go from approval to unsure and unsure to disapproval. So we had a lot of people who were not sure about him and willing to give him a chance and holding out their judgment, now saying, okay, yeah, he's not the man for the job. And we're having people who approved of him not really knowing what to think now that there hasn't been big policy wins, as the guy who, said he was the man with the plan, who now no longer even has a plan, apparently. No budget, Bill C5 that he's already gutted all the teeth from, saying that we're going to get stuff done, but not if all these groups protest me. We're not going to get it done anymore. I'm only going to get stuff done if everyone has consensus, which is impossible in a country of 41 million people. Now, I've heard the rumor that Carney and the Liberals, in order to stave off negative talking points from the Conservatives, are going to try and hammer through at least one pipeline. But the problem is, again, they are very much trying to, Carney's sitting between a cliff gap with his feet on both edge of 2 different cliffs, trying to bridge the gap for his base. Now, he has been playing to the environmental crowd quite a bit and fear-mongering about the Conservatives knocking away all of the environmental regulations and restrictions and hammering stuff through without the approval of First Nations and without any mind to the environment. But now he might end up doing that while also making that project probably bloated on spending and sluggish, because he still wants to sit down for all the consultations, but he's also not pleasing the environmental activists and the reconciliation activists who don't want these projects done at all. So what you're going to see is probably a lot of, again, maybe traditionally conservative people who are willing to vote Liberal this last election saying, well, he's not getting anything done, and they'll shift back conservative. And all these progressive activists who are not pleased with him are going to shift back NDP. A great microcosm of this is the Palestine issue. Carney, for some reason, decided that acknowledging a terror state was going to be a big policy win for him, and now he's even having to walk it back and apologize and recognize that a Jewish man was just viciously attacked on the streets of Montreal. His foreign affairs minister is still being protested by the pro-Hamas people on the streets. It's been a big policy failure. He looks stupid. He's alienating the Jewish community or anyone who's pro-Israel in Canada who was voting Liberal previously. And the people that he's trying to pander to, the pro Hamas people, are not even happy with him because they are left wing, insane people who are never satisfied with anything because their ideology is intifada. It's not, recognition. Can you recognize Palestine, the terror state run by Hamas and Fatah? Can you please do that for us? They don't care. They'll say they want it, and then they'll be dissatisfied once you give it to them because they will push where there's mush, and Mark Carney government is very mushy right now. He's not willing to walk back his Palestinian recognition, but he's also now trying to pander to the not when I say pander, it's technically the right thing to do. But now he's trying to combat the anti-Semitism that he and people like Olivia Chow and Yodi Gondek and whatnot have been enabling. But it's just ticking off everyone in a new and unique way, shifting voters to the conservatives in the GTA area who don't like the anti-Semitism, and all over Canada, making sure that all the left-wing activists still hate his guts and may shift to the NDP when they put in a pro-Hamasnik like Heather McPherson as their new leader. But now let's move on to Mr. Pierre Poilievre's approval, which has actually been improving despite being out of Parliament. So now we have the approval rating for Pierre Poilievre. Sorry if the pauses in this are a bit jarring. The funny thing is I actually do film this fully live. All I do is hit pause on the recording and then I hit restart. There's literally no editing to this at all other than my own manual editing on the fly. But this is actually the most stark difference between the May Abacus Data polling and now the August polling. Poilievre only had a 39% approval rating in August, and that was contrasted with his 44% disapproval rating. So taking out all the people who have no opinion, they're undecided, he was -5 points on his approval. But since then, we have had Poilievre's approval rating increase and his disapproval rating has decreased, which is obviously the reverse of what's happening to Mark Carney and his Liberal government. We had his disapproval rating go from 44 to 41 and his approval rating go from 39 to 42. So he's gained 3 and he's lost 3, which is a 6-point swing, much like the Liberal government, but in the right direction, with him now having at least a 1% net approval rating. It's a positive, it's not great, but considering that during the election, Poilievre was actually fighting negative approval ratings, it's not bad that when he's not even in government yet, he doesn't have a seat yet back in government, he currently at least is gaining in the approval ratings. Part of it is actually what I would consider the hustle factor. I think since losing, usually you get a lot of people thinking he has the stench of losing on him. Do I really like him? Do I really like a man who lost an election? And what happens to previous leaders is they become insular. You don't see them as much. They make very stiff statements. This is very much what I thought of Aaron O'Toole after he lost in 21. I never liked Aaron O'Toole in the first place, but it became reclusive. He sort of took all of his loyalists around him and basically duct taped them to himself for protection. And then eventually the Conservative Party, using the Reform Act, ended up basically ousting him during the convoy when he couldn't actually support, the basic right to be able to move freely without having a vaccination that was entirely medically unnecessary. And I even say this as someone who's vaccinated, but I can tell you it's entirely medically unnecessary, at least when it comes to COVID. Other things you might need to be in vaccination for. I don't want to get all political or nothing on this political show. But what Poilievre has been doing in the Battle Crowfoot by-election, especially recently, because I heard that there was some criticism that he wasn't out in Battle River Crowfoot enough. Since that criticism kind of cropped up around Stampede, he's been out there. I had somebody in my own church approve of the fact that he's actually been in 2, and I believe it was 3 hills, now 2 or 3 times, which they were quite impressed by because it's a big riding with a lot of municipalities in it. And not that Poilievre running around in Battle River Crowfoot and gaining the approval of locals is what's causing this macro shift, but it's just the general perception that Pierre's back, that Pierre's actually, around and he's doing things. He's not sitting around his office, sending memos back and forth to people, telling people to shut up, don't say that. And he's actually hardened on his policies. The immigration stance he now has of saying we want net negative migration, it's not saying negative population growth. It's saying that of the people coming in and out of the country who are not citizens. We want more people leaving than coming in. Obviously, population growth through, the natural birth rate is perfectly fine, but we don't want the population being pumped up by people just simply coming here on a fake student visa or for a low wage job, or bringing in parents on a new chain migration thing that the liberals are pitching. We want people who have skills, or we don't really need them because it's hurting the housing market. It's just destroying young people's job prospects. We need it reversing the other direction. And then the Sovereignty Act that the conservatives are pushing is a good way of kind of repackaging all the election promises the conservatives had made and turning it into a piece of legislation that they are going to put forward a motion on and demand the liberals vote for it, which would get rid of things like all the anti-pipeline and energy laws, Bill C-69, Bill C-48, getting rid of the single-use plastic bans, a lot of that sort of thing. Some of the stuff is a little bit disconnected from each other, but it's a good way of basically putting forward a package that if you ask Canadians about the separate parts of it, they'd probably say it's a good idea, and forcing the liberals to say no. If I was a conservative advisor right now, I would say to constantly have motions on popular policies and make the liberals say no. Say, let's have a 20%, at least a 15% across the board tax cut, every bracket, corporate taxes. Let's reduce the GST from 5 to 4. Let's do all of that stuff in order to get the economy kickstarted so we can outcompete the Americans. And let the liberals say no to that, say no to prosperity, and then you can go back at them and say, I thought we were supposed to be elbows up. I thought we were wanting to bolster Canada's economy, but you don't actually want to do anything to give people back their own money. That's what you should do. But so far, his rhetoric and his policy stances have been giving him dividends, because if Poilievre and a lot of his immigration stuff has started to be said as of like a month and a half ago, if it was unpopular, we would have seen the media reaction and people saying that he's being, a right-wing bigot or whatever, xenophobic. We would have seen that play into a disapproval raise and an approval rating fall if that was truly the attitude of the general Canadian population. It isn't. The general Canadian population is very anti-immigration right now because the immigration policy in this country for the last decade has been garbage. And so opposing that will naturally pay dividends for you. I think that Poilievre pushing for spending reform, actually identifying large areas of spending and saying we should cut this, and again, putting in the liberals' face, hey, $5 billion spent on this nonsense, cut it. We'll put forward a motion saying that you guys should cut it. And then have the liberals saying they want to make government more efficient have to eat the fact that they're unwilling to actually do anything serious to be more efficient. They just put out vague mandates about how they're going to spend less in 3 years or so, and something that Mark Carney never actually has to achieve because he'll probably want to call an election before that time. But anyways, so I just want to do one last thing in this video, and it's just highlight some of the regional issues, both on the approval rating side of stuff as well as the national polling for the parties. Again, hopefully you like this sort of thing, and if you do, like the video, subscribe, leave a comment. But let me pause, let me clean up the whiteboard and show you a couple last things. So I'm going to freestyle this section a bit, but I just want to show you some of the miscellaneous points of interest in the polling. So when I told you that Pierre Poilievre had a +1 approval rating in Canada, that also has to be tempered with the fact that most of his disapproval rating is coming from one province. In fact, he actually is at even or has a positive rating everywhere except, I'll just put over here, Pierre Poilievre. His approval rating, for example, in like Alberta is plus 28%, which is great. But in, Quebec, his approval rating is negative 21%, which isn't fantastic. But the difference is that that's not really a province where he needs a great approval rating. And now let's get over here with Mark Carney. And Mark Carney, his approval rating is obviously higher than Poilievre's, but when you actually look at it, it's also kind of a similar situation. So over here, Pierre Poilievre had a +1 overall percent, and Mark Carney's overall approval rating was plus 19% still. Again, naturally, he is in a honeymoon period, but his Alberta approval rating is currently negative 11%. But His Quebec approval rating is, this is crazy, is plus 41%. It would, with a plus 41, I don't think I have to tell you, it's difficult to find someone in that province who doesn't like the man. And so when he has a plus 29, it's because he's popular in Quebec. But I will also point out that in the national polling, the Bloc Québécois still had about 6.5%. So if an election was held tomorrow, the Liberals may gain a seat. They may even lose a seat in Quebec. It's pretty much at even where it was at back in April. And so a lot of Mr. Carney's approval rating is being soaked up in Quebec, and a lot of Poilievre's disapproval rating is also being soaked up in Quebec, a province where basically neither party has anything to gain. The Conservatives have about 10 seats they win every election. It's usually along the border with Ontario or with, not Ontario, but with like the US. It's the ones close to like Maine and Vermont and whatnot. They tend to be more pro free market ridings. Like Maxime Bernier was the MP for Beauce for a reason. It's a very pro free market riding. It's actually a riding that, despite being in Quebec, is not in favor of supply management. It's a very, again, free enterprising kind of a place. It's not really like other more rural areas or the suburbs of Montreal or Quebec City. The Conservatives also do have a Quebec City riding, but the Conservatives have to stop their obsession with trying to win Quebec. They have 10 seats. They're going to win this year. They're going to win it next year. They could say that they hate the French language and they would still win those 10 seats. And the Liberals could be as liked by Quebecois as they want. The Quebecois could love them, and they're still just going to win their Montreal seats and a couple rural seats, and that is it. Maybe if they really push the envelope, they can win a few more, but that's probably going to be a trade where they're going to have to lose a bunch of other ridings in Western Canada as well as Ontario if they try and do that. So now let me just jump over to the Ontario numbers because it is a battleground province. And at the moment, actually, I don't even need to really move on. Let's just kind of look at their current approval ratings in Ontario. So right now in Ontario, Mark Carney's approval rating is plus 18, which is pretty good. But I will also point out in Ontario, Poilievre's approval rating is plus 3%, which is also not too bad. And Mark Carney, who had a strong appeal in Atlantic Canada, also, I don't need to write this on the board, but you can just take my word for it that I'm reading it. His approval rating in Atlantic Canada is only plus 14. And Poilievre is at even, a province or a collection of provinces where back during the election, even Abacus Data would show Poilievre with a negative 10% approval rating in the Atlantic provinces. It's like the election happening and Poilievre losing his seat and now coming back in Battle River Crowfoot and shifting his messaging in a more culturally conservative direction has, in a certain sense, almost normalized him with Canadians. So even as he actually pushes more right on certain policies, people are just kind of comfortable with him and they're more willing to hear the ideas. Where I feel like the election was this weird space where people irrationally hated Poilievre's guts. Like in the current approval ratings, like obviously again, Carney in the honeymoon that he's in has generally good approval ratings overall. But Poilievre right now, let's just quickly erase this. Poilievre, with his 1% net approval rating, bit of a long nose on that one there, with men, he is at a plus 7% approval. And with women, he's at a negative 5%. Now, this is actually a very big gain for Poilievre because during the election, even in Abacus Data, you would see Poilievre with like a negative 10, 9, 12 with women, and his male approval rating would be at like plus 10. So he's fallen a little bit with men as maybe the hype dies down a little bit with younger men. That doesn't mean they're not going to vote for him. It's just that the approval rating is a little bit less inflated, but also the disapproval rating with women has also become less inflated, almost halving since the election. And so Poilievre may be running an election atmosphere next time around if he ends up staying on as the leader after the national convention in Calgary in January, where everyone's a little bit more willing to hear him out. And even right now, I think with him, again, pushing more culturally, socially, fiscally conservative policies. I think in certain areas they could use a little bit more help fiscally. I hope that they run on an across the board tax cut, because this is a little bit of a nuanced point, but Canadians don't notice the difference. Like, I know they do, and I notice that you guys obviously do. People don't tell the difference between cutting income taxes under $50,000 between 1% and 2.25%. Is 2.25% more? Obviously, it's more than 100% more. But people have to like have 3,000 extra dollars saved from a tax cut before they're feeling like this substantially changes my lifestyle. I go to the grocery store with a different mindset. If you're saving someone $800, that helps, but it helps. It's not transforming. And I think that's where the Conservatives need a transformational platform. So right now, Poilievre's in an atmosphere where people are more willing to listen to him. And so I would say more than ever, run on a transformational platform, because people are not turned off by your style. They're not really turned off by your personality at all. And they're not sticking their fingers in the air saying that you're mini Trump, because as Mark Carney doesn't deliver the goods, and now they're saying, well, what's Poilievre saying? You can totally shift your policy, and it's going to be like people are hearing you for the very first time, because in some cases, it actually is people's first time truly listening to you if you're Pierre Poilievre. And so coming to them saying, I'm not just saying a small reduction compared to the Liberals in immigration. I'm not just saying a little bit more of a tax cut. I'm not just saying a little bit more cuts to wasteful spending. I am saying a transformation in how we do government, in how we do the economy in this country. We're not going to be a subsidy economy anymore. We're not going to be a public sector economy. We're going to be more private sector. We are going to have more healthcare options. We are going to slash taxes, just like Mike Harris had done in Ontario back in the day. Just like we're maybe even going to move towards a flat tax. Not that you have to run on those things. Not that you have to run on something audacious like work for welfare, like Mike Harris did. Not that you have to do something like Gordon Campbell in British Columbia, who was at the time a liberal, but very conservative liberal, in slashing taxes. But do something where it feels like there's the liberals, and then way over there, there's the conservatives with something totally different. Because people don't detect, when it comes to politics, slight differences in fiscal policy. Either you are the opposite of the current guys in how big the changes you're proposing are, or you have to find a social policy. And I would say social policies are another thing the conservatives need to hammer on. The thing is, older voters, people above the age of 55, and if you're watching my show and that describes you, you're probably a conservative. But it's true that disproportionately voters over the age of 55, and especially 60, voted for the Liberals. And it's because the fiscal promises for the Conservatives were too weak. Again, cutting someone's taxes a little bit under $50,000 when you don't even pay taxes on the first $18,000 doesn't mean anything to a lot of these people who already own their own home, live in a safe gated community, and don't really care too much about the trade issues. They're not in the economy anymore. They're retired. Either you have to really slash their taxes, or you got to run on a cultural or social issue that maybe doesn't win these people over, but makes them less likely to see the Liberals as a moral paragon of virtue. You have to hit them on the fact that it's a party that voted against measures to increase criminal penalties for criminals who murder pregnant women. That was something that the Liberals actually did. They voted against a measure to upgrade sentencing for murdering a pregnant woman. I think if older women knew that, they probably wouldn't be as likely to vote Liberal, because that's horrifying. And then with just like older voters in general, immigration's a big deal. They see their neighborhoods changing around them as well, with a lot of people who are just here to work minimum wage jobs and then send remittances home. That changes the atmosphere around them, and they don't like that. They also don't like gender theory being taught to their children in schools or their grandkids. Run on those things, because they're not going to be swayed over by small fiscal policy changes. They're out of the economy now. They, it still matters, but the amount that it matters, the amount that housing policy matters to someone who owns their own home, is very minor. Anyways, so that should be it for this video today, guys. Hopefully you liked this longer form whiteboard video. Hopefully you learned something, or at least hopefully I put you to sleep and you were suffering from insomnia. But whatever the case, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment. And if you guys ever want to help me with the legal fund, I have this ongoing ridiculous lawsuit with this billionaire who is suing me over literally nothing. Donate to the Give Send Go fundraiser I have in the bottom. I paid like 3 rounds of bills, and I still haven't even pumped it up at all. I don't mention it unless I've had to pay a bunch of bills recently. It's not like it's crippling me. It's not like the channel's going to go away, but $5 helps. Anyways, so that's it for me today, guys. See you later.